Welcome to Financial Insider Weekly. I'm your host, Michael Gray, CPA. My guest today is Kathleen Wright. She's a JD, an attorney, but Kathleen's current position is the gift planning officer involved with long-term fundraising for the Silicon Valley chapter of the American Red Cross. She's been with the American Red Cross since December of 2000. That law stuff is feeling a little fuzzy in your brain. Anyway, her previous career was as a lawyer. She was practiced estate planning for 19 years. So it is a little ingrained. Okay. Anyway, Kathleen, I think I'll let you talk about some of these things that you have available for people. But she and I are going to talk about financial preparedness for disaster recovery. Today is July 10th. You're going to be seeing this sometime, several months from now. But right now, the fire season is happening, and particularly a lot of damage happening in Colorado. We've had a pretty dry year, I guess, across the country in many places, and so that's really the height of what's happening right now. So Kathleen, maybe you'd like to talk a little bit about some of this material that you brought with you today.
Well, thanks, Mike, and thank you again for asking me to appear on behalf of American Red Cross. The wildfires, yes, right now in the middle of July and ever since mid-June have been very serious across the United States. Right now we have wildfires in 10 different states, including Colorado, which has been the one that's been on the news the most, but also in Utah, in Wyoming, in New Mexico, in Texas. Here in California, we've had 3 brush fires just in the last day outside of in South San Jose. And it's a very dry year across the United States. Wildfires for us here in California are one of the most common natural disasters we will have, in addition to earthquakes and sometimes flooding. The wildfire fires, though, are very serious in that they can require people to evacuate in a moment's notice, and that is why when we're talking about being financially prepared and having our documents ready to go, it's extremely important that they be ready and at hand and available to grab and take with you if you've got that 30 minutes or less reverse 911 call.
Okay. So in California, we don't get the hurricanes very much like they do in Florida, but maybe we can talk for a few minutes about the types of natural disasters we have to deal with here.
Right.
And that would mean look at our first slide here for a few moments. You don't have to look for the slide. We may not be able to see it. So
we won't be able to see it here. I'll just have to remember from my head what's on it.
And I've actually given you a copy. Well, actually, Ryan put it up for us.
All right, Ryan, thank you. So you'll see on the slide the 2 most prevalent natural disasters we have here in California. One is earthquakes. We haven't had a very serious one since Loma Prieta in 1989. But that just means that the next one is all that much closer. And they're predicting that we will have a magnitude 9.0 within the next 30 to 40 years.
That's scary. That's big.
That's a very large earthquake, and it will cause substantial damage, and both to our infrastructure and probably mean that our power grid will be out for quite a while. So that is obviously one thing we prepare for. But currently the most serious problem that we have is the very dry season that we've had this last year for rainfall. That's been pretty prevalent across the United States now. And so this second slide you'll see here on the right-hand side is actually a very recent picture from Colorado Springs. And there's a gentleman, look, that's the homeowner. He is looking through the things in his what remains of his home, and he is searching for anything he can find.
Yeah.
So I can tell you, if your papers were in that house, they are probably not there any longer. You may be able, some people have a fireproof safe where they keep their papers. Sometimes that will protect it, but fireproof safes are usually only good up to about 1,000 degrees. And the ones that you get at, so that would be the kind you get at, maybe Office Depot or Office Max or something like that. These fires that came through in Colorado were at about 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
That's a lot harder.
That's a lot harder, and what you will see is things just melted down to the ground. I actually am a disaster volunteer as well, and I served in Austin, Texas last September, where they had similar wildfires. And when I went out to survey some of the areas, it's hard to imagine that what used to be a home is really completely ashes. You think, well, what happened to the refrigerator? What happened to the stove? What happened to the water heater? And basically they just melt all the way down to the ground.
Wow, it's amazing.
So it's pretty incredible. So the recommendation when we have for people is to make sure you try to take your documents with you. And we have a list of documents and some of the materials that we have available at the Red Cross. It's part of your disaster kit, your GO kit. And we tell you what you should be putting in that kit and how you should be storing them.
Okay, so I think we'll get there in a few moments, but sort of working with your slides here, trying to keep some sort of sequence. So maybe you'd like to talk for a few minutes though about the San Bruno gas explosion and how the Red Cross helped in that situation.
Sure, the gas explosion was a year.
That's the next slide, by the way.
Well, actually, I think we've changed it. You've got I gave you some updated ones.
You're keeping me guessing here.
I am. Well, you know what? We don't want to talk about the same thing every time I show
up,
right?
All right.
So actually, I had on here some quotes from one of the firefighters in Colorado. His name is Jeff O'Brien. And so that's why I've called him Firefighter Jeff. He says there is three priorities you should place on what you think about taking with you. And you will see there in priority number 1 is your important papers, your prescription medication, and your important records that you cannot lose. So very appropriate that we are talking today about making sure we have the correct records and papers and they're in a format that we can grab them and go. Now, if you're sitting, this priority 1 is what our friend Firefighter Jeff says, that if you get a call and they tell you you have 30 minutes to evacuate, that should be in your priority 1 list. And you should be able to, you know where those are, they're by your front door, or you can scan those documents and save them to a flash drive. I have a handy dandy one that was given to the Red Cross by our friends at SanDisk, and this one happens to have a little mouth-to-mouth guard in case you want to give mouth-to-mouth resuscitation.
Wow. You
can also scan and put them on a CD-ROM, and this is equally as good. The flash drive is a little easier to carry around with you, and so that's, if you don't want to carry around a big bucket of papers, that's a really great way to be able to do that. The interesting thing about the 30 minutes or less to evacuate, when I was again talking about when I was in Austin, Texas last September, there were people who told me they had 5 minutes to evacuate. Those fires came together so quickly that the sheriff was driving down the street and not slowly saying, you have 5 minutes to get out. Wow. And so people didn't even have time to get anything at all. They got out they were in the backyard and they raced to their cars, they got their animals, and they drove out. So one of the things that you might want to consider as well is having your CD-ROM or your flash drive, maybe a copy of it, in the trunk of your car, because then you know that you've got that and you can take it with you if you don't even have time to go in your house.
Yeah. Another thing, of course, is you could keep some of these documents in a bank safe deposit box, because maybe your car's going to get melted too.
That's true, and there were certainly circumstances where, you know, the second and third car were left behind, and they melted right down along with the refrigerator.
Oh my gosh. All right. What can we do to prepare for a disaster? You had some personal experience volunteering during a large-scale wildfire and recovery. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. One of the things that we encourage people to do is to obtain one of these booklets, which is called the Disasters and Financial Planning. And this is a book that is co-produced by the American Institute on CPAs, on their foundation, the American Red Cross, and also the National Endowment for Financial Planners. So it has 3 groups coming together to actually tell you what you should do to be able to do that. We have these available down at our office on North 1st Street in San Jose, or you can call me or email me to ask for one of them. But in these books are lists of the documents that you should put in there, and the usual ones that you might think of: your birth, death, marriage certificates, any child custody papers or divorce papers, military records, copies of your deeds, your driver's licenses, your mortgage property documents. So those types of things are the ones that we would recommend that you have copies of, or and maybe put the originals in the bank deposit box that you spoke about, or the fireproof safe, but that's not always going to do it for you.
Okay. So I'm not quite sure where I am now. Should we show the slide about being prepared at work, or? You
could do that, and that's certainly one of the things that, especially here in the in Silicon Valley, we have people who are very dedicated to their work. We have engineers and high-tech people who sometimes work 12, 14, 16 hours a day if they're on a big project.
Yeah.
So the likelihood of them being at work when a disaster occurs means that they're going to need to be prepared to stay at work. Red Cross just had a wonderful experience with our friends again at SanDisk, where we went and we did worked with 1,000 of their employees, putting together similar backpacks like this and making sure that each employee had one at their desk. And that's something that's possible to do by calling our local office and arranging that. It doesn't have to be a huge backpack. It can just be 5 or 6 items. But in addition to the preparedness items that you want to put in there so you can be comfortable for the next 72 hours, we really also recommend that people have a communication plan, because if you're at work, that means your family is probably at home or at school.
Yes.
And if they're at home or at school, you're going to want to be able to connect with them.
Yes.
So that's another very important document you should have.
Okay. All right. So maybe we can talk for a few minutes about what we should assemble in the process for financial preparedness for a disaster.
Right.
And I think the slide that we have here is the financial Go Kit.
Yep, we have our essential Go Kit items. I think I may have actually deleted it from the, we talked a bit about, but I do have it, I copied it to bring along. You told me 6 slides, so I was ruthless in taking them away.
Okay.
But again, it was similar to what I read out of the financial planning for disasters. You know, your birth certificate.
They're not going to be able to read that, Kathleen, so just go ahead and
birth
you look at it.
Marriage license, passports, a copy of your Social Security card, military and veteran papers, critical medical information, so hopefully a little medical card, cash. Here's a very interesting thing, because we're all very used to using our debit or our credit cards.
Yeah.
And when there's a power outage in a large-scale disaster, you're not going to be able to use that debit card. So have cash. We recommend $50 in small bills, because if you have $20 bills and there's a loaf of bread for sale, guess how much that loaf of bread is going to cost?
$20.
$20. So if you only have $20 bills, you're not going to be able to get the items that you might need. Other things like your insurance policies, very critical for any damage and trying to account and make claims for things. A household inventory, another very important financial document. Sometimes you put those together when you get your homeowner's policy, or you update them along the way, but to have that inventory. Now that we have camera phones, easy to take pictures of things that are important. It might be hard to value if if everything is lost in a particular disaster. Your deeds and your ownership documents, so the deed to your house, if you've got any other properties, very important to have those. And in my area of practice and what I do with Red Cross, your trust, your will, your powers of attorney. You can have copies of those documents. You don't need the originals to necessarily use them, but important to have copies of those things.
Yeah. Okay. Where do you keep this thing?
Where do you keep this huge pile of papers? Well, as I mentioned before, you can keep them all in an accordion file. You can keep them in a your box of important items that you want to grab and go. But again, if you have a scanner at home, I absolutely recommend trying to get copies of your important documents and put them on one of these smaller items that you can save them and take them with you, because you're going to be able to recreate those documents much easier than trying to go through all the pieces of paper. If you are in a natural disaster or a man-made one, and you end up being evacuated somewhere and you're not able to go back to your house, you're going to be sitting across from someone who is dressed just like me. That's going to be a client caseworker. That person is going to go through all of the needs that you have and ask you for those important documents. If you can hand that person your CD-ROM or your flash drive, then you're going to be able to get that process started a whole lot easier than having to tell them where you were born and go to that county to get another copy of your birth certificate.
So this is something that possibly you could have a student do at your home, or maybe you can find a service that does secretarial services or something, and so you can ask them to scan this for you. If you don't have time to do it yourself, you just have to gather all this stuff.
Yep, you've got a spare teenager around. I'll tell you, they're the most adept at doing this kind of thing. They know all the technical stuff, and that's a great job for children or grandchildren. The secretarial or the copy services, such as Kinko's or FedEx or any of your local copy places, usually all of those have those type of services.
Yeah, okay. So let's see here. So what other resources are there for information about financial preparedness in a disaster?
Well, we did talk about our disaster for financial planning.
Yeah.
You can go to some of the websites, which are our emergency services website for the state of California. It's on the final slide here. And also the federal site, the FEMA Emergency Management Services. They will have similar lists to the ones that are in the financial planning booklet. Any of the emergency sites will tell you what type of documents you need to gather together and be ready to go when you need to. We also have a number of brochures and preparedness information at the local Red Cross. One of them is this wildfire, Are You Prepared? Has including the information about what you need to take with you some very good information about how to protect your home. What are the setback requirements for clearing? And so those are available at our local Red Cross office, or also from the emergency services for our state, and from FEMA, so any of those. If you have anybody in your family who has a disability, we also have special preparation, including the normal stuff that you would have, but some ideas about how to get those folks out safely, and what additional materials you might want to bring if you have somebody who has a special disability or handicap that might prevent them from getting out safely.
Yeah. Wow. So, so one is be aware of where your local Red Cross office is.
Yes.
Okay. You and I are recording this in San Jose. Actually, this is broadcast all over the Bay Area.
You can go to redcross.org, and in the upper right-hand corner is a place where you can type in your zip code, and it will tell you what your nearest Red Cross office is.
Right. And there's all kinds of things. I imagine they even have classes on financial preparedness there, but also on other things related to safety. Train your daughter to be a babysitter.
There you go. Yes.
And CPR, what have you.
Right. Well, we have all the classes, and the schedules for those classes are listed on the Red Cross site.
Okay.
Any preparedness class you would take will include some information about financial preparedness and the documents and other items you might need, and you'll be given some of the checklists and things that we have to be able to adequately put together your home preparedness kit.
Okay. So I'm not quite sure about where we are as far as how much time that we have left. We're getting close to the end, I'm sure. Because we've got 5 minutes, Brian just told me. So anyway, maybe you can talk a little bit about, what you've seen and what a difference it makes for financial preparedness and so forth, and what's happened when people haven't been so financially prepared.
Well, that's actually a pretty interesting lead-in to talking about how much easier it is for people to start their recovery if they are able to produce the pieces of paper that can track their lives up to that point. And they are going to be so much further ahead in terms of being able to work with the insurance companies, in terms of being able to make sure they have proper medications and insurance information, medical insurance information. They will essentially move to the front of the line in terms of getting the processing done, because that's really what takes the long term of it all. Right now we have about 57 volunteers from our local Bay Area group out working with the total number of 1,500 volunteers across the United States. So there will be people available to help if there is a major disaster, much as there was when the San Bruno disaster occurred. We had on-site service centers set up, but you can go a long way to helping them by having the information at your fingertips, and probably in more than one place. We talked about having it in your Go kit. We talked about making an extra one and putting it in the trunk of your car. You might have one off-site, not only at your bank but maybe at work, or with a family member who's out of the area. So perhaps you can access it there if you're not, if you aren't able to get your own information out. So making sure maybe the information is done, and then updating the information, because as a lot of us do, we do something, we feel really good about being finished with that particular task, and then we set it aside and we don't look at it for another 5 or 10 years. So important to update that, look at it maybe once a year, maybe the same time as we change the clocks or something in the spring, because that might be a reminder.
Yeah. I thought things were all settled. I just got a new credit card, and then Bank of America sends me another one, and they says, well, it looks like maybe you're in the group of numbers that might have been compromised. We're just sending you a new card, and so you're going to have a new number.
Right.
And now I've got to notify everybody, And so, all the inconvenience with that, but that's something else to add on to this list. And now if you've got 5 of these things floating around out there, you've got to get them out, to all those different places. So unfortunately, it's making life a little more complicated. That's just the way life is these days.
Well, that's also the beauty of having something in an electronic format, if that's possible for you.
Yeah.
Is that it's much easier to update it. You just update the file, and you make sure you save it yet again with a current date.
And it's the same thing. Okay, so disaster preparedness, have that computer backup done.
Yes.
And there are some services that are available that will actually do your backup from where you are and get the information off-site, and maybe you can salt what we're talking about in there, and so it will automatically be taken care of.
Right.
So,
well, and there are services that do that as well.
Yeah.
They will save your personal financial information, and it's encrypted, and there are firewalls, and those tend to work better than not doing anything at all, but as you found out with the Bank of America example, it's not foolproof.
Right,
so,
right. Okay, well, probably have about a minute left. Maybe
well,
you have something to throw out there.
I have another present for you, because I always bring you one.
Oh.
Last time it was a larger little first aid kit, but this is a personal one that has bandages and wipes, and you can put it on your backpack, because you look like a backpack kind of guy, or maybe one of your kids.
Maybe one of my
or,
kids.
Or it has a belt loop, so if you're a hiker, you can take this with you on the trail.
Well, that's
so
very handy. Well, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
That's great.
And the other thing is, I certainly want to thank all the people who are supporters of the Red Cross, because they're helping those folks who've had a very bad couple of weeks of it. And their support helps us restore those people to the life that they had before.
That's great. Kathleen, thanks again for joining me. Folks, we're all out of time. We'll see you next time on Financial Insider Weekly.